My name is Aurelio Mester. Everybody calls me Ray, has since boot camp, on account of nobody in the Great Lakes could get their mouth around Aurelio without sounding like they were choking on a shrimp. I'm from Hialeah. My father sold marine diesel parts out of a shed with a corrugated roof that sounded like applause when it rained, and I grew up thinking the loudest thing in the world was rain on tin. I was wrong about that, obviously. I'm a gunner's mate first class. What that means in the practical sense is that I take care of guns that other people shoot. I clean them. I gauge them. I write down how many rounds go through them. I have a little green notebook in my left breast pocket, waterproof, the kind you can hold under a faucet, and in that notebook I keep round counts for every crew-served weapon on Salt Kettle Range going back 6 years. Barrels have a life. Everything has a life. You just have to write it down, or you'll lie to yourself about it later. Guys make fun of me for the notebook. Let 'em. In 2019, I caught a barrel 1,100 rounds past its change interval because of that notebook, and the kid who would have been behind it still has both his eyes. Other thing about me, I can't stand the smell of sunscreen. Coconut, banana, that white chalky zinc stuff, it turns my stomach. 19 years on the water and I still put it on with my breath held like a man swallowing medicine. Every DV day, every ceremony, the visitors show up smelling like a beach vacation, and I spend the morning trying not to think about it. I'm telling you this so you know I'm a real person and not somebody making a legend. Real people notice sunscreen. Legends don't. Salt Kettle Range sits on the Mississippi coast, on a low tongue of land that pushes out into the Sound like it's testing the water with its toe. Sand, scrub pine, sawgrass. A shell road that eats tires. In August, the heat comes up out of the ground at you, not down from the sky, and the sand fleas find the exact spot on your ankle where your boot ends and your sock has slid down. We shoot crew-served weapons there. 50 cals mostly. M2S. Some Mark 19s. There's a saltwater impact area that goes out about 2,000 yards to a line of pilings, and past the pilings is nothing but the Sound and, way out, the smudge of a barrier island that used to be twice as big before the storms took it. At 1,600 yards, on a piling somebody drove into the mud in 1972, there is a bell. An honest-to-God ship's bell. Bronze, green with age, about the size of a 5-gallon bucket. Came off a dredge called the LFA that broke her back in a hurricane and got scrapped. Somebody in the range detachment, nobody's sure who, hung it out there as a joke. A target you couldn't hit. 1,600 yards over water, with the wind coming off the Gulf and the mirage boiling up so bad by 9 in the morning that the bell doesn't look like a bell anymore. It looks like a lie somebody told you. The bell has been rung twice. In the range tower there's a plaque. Piece of brass on a piece of scarred oak, screwed to the wall next to the fire extinguisher, and it says, Kettle Bell confirmed. 1998, GM3S RASK. 2001, GM3S RASK. That's it, that's the whole plaque. I'd looked at that thing maybe 4,000 times. 6 years, 5 days a week, standing in that tower with my coffee going cold while some lieutenant read the safety brief. 4,000 times, and I never once wondered who S. Rask was. I figured he was dead. Everybody figured he was dead. That's the kind of name that belongs to a dead man, a name on brass, an initial and a last name, a ghost who could shoot. We were all wrong about that too. Now the stutter. Down on the line we had 6 M2 heavy machine guns. 5 of them were fine. Ordinary. Guns are like dogs, they've got tempers, but most of them are just dogs. Number 4 was not a dog. Number 4 was something else. Number 4 had come to Salt Kettle in 2003 from a small boat unit that got disbanded. Shore-mounted, refurbished, rebuilt 3 times that I know of, and it never ever ran right. Not in a way you could put your finger on. It would go through 500 rounds sweet as sugar and then it would hesitate. That's the only word for it. A little hitch in the rhythm like a man missing a stair in the dark. Then it'd pick back up. Sometimes it did worse. Twice in my 6 years, number 4 ran away, kept firing after the trigger came off. Both times we got it under control the way you're trained to, breaking the belt, keeping the muzzle down range, hands steady, everybody's heart going like a bird in a box. Nobody hurt. We wrote it up. Armorers came out. They gauged it, timed it, swapped the backplate, swapped the bolt, swapped the barrel extension. Paperwork said it was within spec every single time. Chief Delarond, who retired before I got there, is supposed to have said, "That gun ain't broke. That gun's just got a memory." We called it the stutter. Junior guys got told the name and never asked why, the way you accept things in the Navy. It sat on the far right of the firing line, position 6. We'd moved it to the end, so if it went stupid, it'd go stupid, pointing at nothing but water. On DV days, we'd throw a tarp over it and shoot the other 5. I want you to hold on to that. The tarp, because on this particular Tuesday, the tarp came off. The reason there was a Tuesday at all was that Salt Kettle was closing. Not the whole range. The money people had decided that Range Charlie, the crew-served line, the one with the bell, was getting shut down and folded into a bigger facility 200 miles east where they had newer berms and better environmental numbers. 54 years of shooting, done. They gave us a date and a ceremony and a name for it, Final Live Fire Commemoration, which is the kind of phrase you get when a committee is embarrassed about something. Captain Lanu, Ovid Lanu, our a big soft-spoken Cajun with a laugh you could hear across the parade field, wanted it done right. He invited everybody, retired chiefs, local officials in golf shirts, a congressional staffer who kept asking where the bathroom was, a naval special warfare detachment that had been training on the eastern half of the range all summer, because the captain figured if you're going to close a gun range, you might as well have some guys there who look good in photographs. And he invited the families. That's the part they left out of the club versions. There were 3 Gold Star families on the bleachers that morning. Salt Kettle had trained a lot of sailors, and some of them didn't come home, and the captain, who is a better man than the Navy usually deserves, had somebody dig through 50 years of records and send letters. One of those families was the Prospers. Odalie Prosper was 79 years old. She came up from Terrebonne Parish in a Buick driven by her nephew, and she wore a navy blue dress and a hat with a white band, and she sat on the second row of the bleachers with a folded piece of paper in her hand that she never opened, not once, the whole day. Her son's name was Wendell. Everybody called him Windy. I met the Admiral at 5:17 in the morning, and I didn't know she was an admiral, and that is entirely my fault and also entirely not. Here's what happened. I get to the range early, always, 2 hours before anybody, because the guns don't set themselves up and because I like the range before the sun's up, the sawgrass ticking, the water flat as poured glass, the pilings standing out there in a line like they're waiting for a train. I just unlocked the arms connex and I was hauling the tripod for gun 1 when I saw a car in the lot. Rental sedan. White. Parked crooked across 2 spots, which annoyed me the way things annoy you at 5 in the morning. And down at the edge of the shell road, standing right where the sand starts, there was a woman. She was maybe 5'7". Gray hair pulled back in a short tail through the gap in a tan ball cap, plain cap, no unit, no scrambled eggs, no nothing. Faded blue polo, khakis with a crease that had given up, old running shoes, the kind that have been white in their lifetime. She had her hands in her pockets, and she was looking out at the water. I figured she was somebody's mother, or somebody's aunt, or lost. "Ma'am," I said, walking over, "range is closed till 08. There's a ceremony later, but you can't be down here right now." She turned around. Now I'll tell you what I noticed, because I noticed it and then I ignored it, and that's a thing I've thought about a lot since. Her forearms. She was standing there with her hands in her pockets and the polo sleeves pushed up, and her forearms were wrong for a woman in a rental car. They were roped. Not Jim roped. Not that smooth, inflated look. They had that flat, ugly, functional strength you see in commercial fishermen and old riggers, where the tendons stand out like cable, and on the back of her right hand, running from the base of the thumb up under the sleeve, there was a scar, wide, pale, shiny in the way of a burn that healed a long time ago and didn't heal well. "Sorry," she said. "I know I'll be out of your way." Her voice was low and had gravel in it, not smoke or gravel, something else. "You with the ceremony?" "More or less." She looked past my shoulder at the firing line at the 6 covered shapes under their tarps. 6 positions now. There were 8. I stopped walking. "You been out here before?" "Long time ago." She said it flat, like a man reporting weather. Then she looked back at the water and said, half to herself, "Belle's still out there." I have thought about this moment, more than I've thought about most moments in my life. Because right there, 5:17, sand flees at my ankles, coffee in my truck going cold, right there I had it. The whole thing. She stood on a closed range at dawn and asked about a Belle that isn't on any map, that no visitor knows exists, that you cannot see from the parking lot. And I said, "Yes, ma'am, still out there." And she said, "Good." And I walked back to my tripod. That's it. That's all I did. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm the guy who wrote down 1,100 rounds in a green notebook and saved a kid's eyes, and when it actually mattered, I walked back to my tripod. By 800, the range looked like a county fair. Somebody had trucked in bleachers. Somebody had trucked in a tent. There was a table with sweating pitchers of tea and a coffee urn that had run out by 8:15, which is a Navy tradition older than the Navy. The chaplain was there. The congressional staffer had found the bathroom and now wanted to know about parking. 24 retired chiefs stood in a loose knot near the tower, all of them with the same haircut they'd had in 1984, all of them telling each other things they already knew. Down on the line we had the guns uncovered. 5 of them. Number 4 still under its tarp at position 6, and I'd checked the tarp twice because I am who I am. The NSW guys came down around 8:30. I want to be careful here, because I've heard this story told in ways that make them out to be jackasses, and they weren't. They were, mostly, quiet. There's a thing that happens with those guys where the loud ones are usually the newest. The senior ones stand at the back with their arms crossed and say almost nothing and miss almost nothing. Their chief was a man named Dominic Marchetti. Everybody called him Bex, and I never learned why. Built like a fire hydrant, sunburned across the nose, and he shook my hand and asked me first thing before he asked anything else whether we ran a hot line or a cold line, which is a professional's question. I liked him immediately. The one who caused the trouble wasn't NSW at all. His name was Dane Court. Court was a contractor, weapons instructor hired by the range detachment, had been at Salt Kettle about 4 years. Big man, 40-something, shaved head, and one of those beards that's supposed to say I used to do something without ever specifying what. He wore a shooting shirt with a company logo, and he had a habit of standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt, chest out, chin up, like a man posing for a statue nobody commissioned. Court was not a bad man. I need you to understand that too, because it would be easier if he were. Court was a man who had built his entire self out of being the guy who knew about guns. And when you build yourself out of one thing, you have to defend that one thing like your life depends on it, because it does. He was running the demo. The captain had asked him to. And around 900, when everybody was seated and sweating and the chaplain had finished, Court walked the line with a microphone and started explaining the M2 Browning to a bleacher full of people who did not care. "This weapon," he said, "is older than everybody in this tent." He got his laugh. "Designs from 1918, John Moses Browning, and I'll tell you what, it hasn't changed because it doesn't need to change." He got his nod. I stood at position 3 with a spotting scope and a paddle, and I watched Odile Prosper on the second row of the bleachers, holding her folded paper, not laughing at anything. The Admiral arrived at 9:17. She came in through the gate in the same rental sedan, and she parked it crooked again, and she got out, and she was in service khakis now. Which is where the whole thing starts, really. Because service khakis on an Admiral at a distance in the glare with a garrison cover on, you see silver. You don't see what. And the crowd was in the tent, and she came around the back of the bleachers rather than up the middle, and she did not want a fuss, and she did not get one. Captain Lanu met her at the corner of the tent, and I saw him come to attention, and I saw her put a hand out flat, no, don't. And I saw him grin and shake her hand instead, and the two of them stood there talking for maybe 90 seconds with their heads close together like men do at funerals. Then she went and sat down. On the bleachers, third row, behind the families like a guest. Nobody announced her. There was supposed to be an announcement. It was on the schedule, I saw the schedule, but the schedule also said coffee would last past 8:15 so. And I'm on the line and my back is to all of this, and I've got a spotting scope and a checklist, and I never turned around. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Everybody who was there that day has a version where they knew, where they looked up and something in them said that woman is different, every one of them. Bex Marchetti says he clocked her walking in. Fine, maybe he did, he's the type. I never turned around. I was counting belts. The demo ran about 40 minutes and it ran fine, and then it didn't. Court had 4 shooters on the line, 2 of his own instructors, 1 NSW operator who clearly did not want to be there and did it anyway, and a kid named Tolliver. Seaman Tolliver was 19, big ears, nervous laugh. He'd been at Salt Kettle 9 weeks, and he was one of those kids who's so eager he trips over himself, and I liked him, and I'd been letting him help me with round counts because he was the only person in the entire detachment who found them interesting. Tolliver was on gun 2, and gun 2 was fine. And Tolliver put about 40 rounds into a Hulk target at 800 yards and looked back over his shoulder with his whole face lit up like Christmas. And the bleachers applauded politely, and that was the demo. Then Court took the microphone and said, "Now, Captain Lanu tells me we're closing this range, 54 years, and there's a tradition out here that some of you may not know about." I went cold. Standing in 94 degrees, I went cold. "There's a bell," Court said, 1,600 yards out, off the old dredge LFA. "It's been hit twice in the history of this range. Twice." He let that sit. 2 men, both in the 90s, both before I got here. And I'll be honest with y'all, I've put a lot of rounds at that bell. Laughter good-natured. He was good at this, I'll give him that. So today, for the last live fire on Range Charlie, we're going to open the line. Anybody who's qualified, and I mean qualified, and here he looked at the retired chiefs and got his laugh again, comes down, takes a turn, and takes a swing at the kettle bell. 10 rounds. That's it. 10 rounds. And Captain Lanu, at the corner of the tent, with his arms folded, smiled and did not stop him. I want to be fair to the captain. I've thought about this. He knew who was sitting in the 3rd row. He'd shaken her hand 90 seconds earlier. I think he wanted to see what would happen. I think Ovid Lanu, God bless him, wanted to watch. 6 men shot. Nobody rang the bell. Nobody came close. You want to know what 1,600 yards over water with a .50 looks like from position 3. It looks like nothing. It looks like a man leaning into a gun and the gun going ba 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 ba, and then, 3 seconds later, a little white feather of spray somewhere out past the pilings, and you're not even sure that was your splash. And by then the mirage has swallowed the bell and you're shooting at a rumor. 2 of the retired chiefs went. One of them, a wiry old bosun named Pearl who'd shot at Salt Kettle in 1981, got a splash close enough that the tower whooped. Everybody clapped. He came off the gun grinning with his hands shaking, and he was 71 years old, and he said, "That's it, that's my last one." And I thought that was the most beautiful thing I'd see all day. It wasn't. Bex Marchetti shot, he was good. Genuinely good, tight, controlled bursts, reading his splashes, walking them. Missed. Came off the gun, said that bell's a myth, and sat back down, and he wasn't wrong to say it. Court shot last. And he shot for effect. Long, ripping bursts, a lot of noise, and when he stood up he was smiling because he never expected to hit it either. It wasn't about hitting it. And then he took the mic and said, "Anybody else? Going once." And a voice from the bleachers, dry as sandpaper, said, "I'll take a turn." Everybody turned around. I turned around, first time all morning. She was already standing, cap in her hand. Gray hair, sweat at her temples, khakis with a crease that had given up 2 years ago. 54 years old and standing in the aisle of the bleachers with her chin level. And 100, and some people looked at her and saw a lady. That's all. That's the whole indictment. They saw a lady in her 50s in a uniform they weren't reading, and half of them figured she was Supply Corps, and the other half figured she was somebody's spouse who'd gotten confused about the rules. Somebody in the back, I never found out who, and I've asked, said, not quietly, "Oh, here we go." Somebody laughed. And then more of them laughed, the way a laugh moves through a crowd, catching, because a laugh gives people permission, and permission is a relief. The congressional staffer laughed. 2 of the retired chiefs laughed. One of Court's instructors laughed so hard he had to take his sunglasses off. Tolliver didn't laugh. Bex Marchetti didn't laugh. Odile Prosper turned her head and looked at the woman for a long moment and then turned back to face the water. And Captain Lanu at the corner of the tent did not say one single word. He just uncrossed his arms. Court was grinning ear to ear. He had the mic in his hand and a bleacher full of laughing people, and 4 years of being the guy who knows about guns, and he lifted the microphone and he said, "Ma'am, with respect, this ain't the gift shop. That one killed, the tent came apart." She walked down the bleacher steps, took her time, didn't hurry once, and I noticed she came down the steps sideways, one hand on the rail, the way a person does when a knee has been rebuilt. She walked out onto the line, past position 1, past position 2, past me. Close enough that I could see there was no sunscreen on her at all. She'd burned and reburned so many years that her skin had just given up and turned to leather. She stopped in front of Court. The laughter died down. Not out. Down. The kind of quiet where everybody's still smiling, still enjoying it, waiting for the punchline they've already decided is coming. She looked at the 5 guns on the line. Then she looked past them at position 6 at the tarp. And she said, and I heard this, I was 11 feet away. I would swear to it under oath. "Which one's the runaway?" Court's grin didn't move, but something behind it did. "Ma'am, you've got 6 positions and 5 guns uncovered." She nodded down the line at the tarp. "That one's under a cover on a live fire day, so either it's broke or it's the one that runs away." She looked back at him. "Which is it?" And Dane Court, standing in a shooting shirt with a company logo, with a microphone in his hand and 100 people watching, opened his mouth and did not have anything to put in it. That's when I stopped breathing. Because there are maybe 9 people alive who know number 4 runs away. It's not on the safety brief. It's not on the placard. It's in a green notebook in my left breast pocket and in the mouths of some old chiefs. Nobody told her. She looked at a tarp on a hot day and she knew. She turned around then, and she looked at the whole tent, all of them, the laughers and the ones who'd stopped, and she found Odile Prosper in the second row, and she held that old woman's eyes for about 2 seconds, and I saw Mrs. Prosper's hand close on that folded paper hard enough to crush it. Then the woman in the tan cap that she was no longer wearing said, to nobody in particular, in that gravel voice, "Take the tarp off number 4. And Captain Ovid Lanu from the corner of the tent said one word. He said, "Ray." Not petty officer Mester, not GM1. Ray, like a man asking a favor. And I stood there in 94 degrees with a spotting scope in my hand, and 100 people watching. And I understood, in a slow cold wave that started at the back of my neck, that the captain had known who she was since 900, and that the plaque in the tower said GM3SRASK twice, and that the reason number 4 had a memory was that somewhere out there in that flat green water in 1999. I'll get to it. I put the scope down. I walked to position 6, and I took the tarp off the stutter. A tarp on a hot day weighs more than a tarp. That's not poetry, that's physics. The canvas gets heavy with damp off the sound overnight, and then the sun bakes it stiff. So it comes off in a sheet instead of a fold, and it fights you. I got 2 corners loose and the third one hung up on the charging handle, and I had to stand there and work it free with everybody watching, and I could feel 100 pairs of eyes on my back like a sunburn. The tarp came away, and there it was. Number 4, the stutter. If you've never seen an M2 up close, I'll tell you it doesn't look like a machine so much as a thing that got forged. 84 pounds of receiver, sitting square on a tripod, all right angles and rivets, and that big spade grip at the back like 2 handles on an antique plow. Browning drew it in 1918, and every man who's ever tried to improve it has come away holding his hat. Number 4's parkerizing had gone gray-green in patches. Somebody had touched up the receiver with black spray paint about 9 years ago, badly, and you could see the drips. The rear sight leaf was bent about 4 degrees to the left, always had been. And on the left side plate, just under the feed tray, somebody had scratched 3 letters with a punch, so long ago that the scratches had gone the same gray as the metal. WMP. I'd seen those letters 1,000 times, figured they were a manufacturer's mark. I never once said them out loud. I folded the tarp badly, because my hands were doing something strange, and I stepped back. She was already looking at it. Not at the sight, not at the barrel. At the hinge where the top cover meets the receiver, head tilted, hands still in her pockets, like a woman looking at a horse she used to own. Court recovered fast, I'll give him that. He'd had about 4 seconds of nothing behind his face, and then he stuck the microphone back in the stand and came across the line with his thumbs in his belt, and he said, loud enough for the tent, "Ma'am, I appreciate the interest, but that gun's down-checked." She didn't look up. "It's not." "Ma'am, it's not down-checked," still not looking up. "If it were down-checked, the bolt be pulled and there'd be a red tag on the grip. There's no tag, it's covered." She finally turned her head. "There's a difference between broke and not trusted, isn't there?" Somebody in the bleachers coughed. Court's ears went red. Not his face, his ears. "I watched it happen," he said. "That weapon has a documented history of uncommanded fire." "I know," she said. 3 flat syllables, and I felt the hair come up on my arms. Court turned to Captain Lanu and made a gesture with both hands, palms up, the universal gesture of "Sir, are you seeing this?" And Ovid Lanu, 61 years old, 400-some days of command left in his career, stood at the corner of that tent with his arms folded and looked back at Court with an expression of mild, courteous interest. He said, "Mr. Court, is the range hot or cold?" "Sir, it's cold, but—" "Then nothing's happening yet, is it?" The captain smiled with about a third of his mouth. "Let the lady look at the gun." She looked at the gun for 4 minutes. I timed it, not on purpose. My eye went to the clock in the tower window because I couldn't stand to keep watching, and then I kept checking it, and it was 4 minutes and change. 4 minutes is a long time in front of a crowd. Try it. Stand in front of 100 people and do nothing but examine a machine, without speaking, without performing, without one single glance up to see how you're doing. She didn't perform. First thing she did was clear it, and she cleared it like a person who has cleared 10,000 of them. Pulled the bolt to the rear, thumb-checked the T-slot, ran her little finger up under the feed tray. Fast. Not showy fast. The kind of fast that comes from a thing living in your hands so long that your hands do it while your head is somewhere else. Then she stopped and did something nobody expected. She put her ear on it, laid the side of her head right down on the receiver, flat against the top cover, and closed her eyes and pulled the bolt back and rode it forward. Slow. Then again. Then a third time, and I swear she let it go free the third time and just listened to it slam. The tent had gone quiet, not respectful quiet, confused quiet. The kind where people look at each other to see whether it's still okay to laugh. Court said, "Ma'am, what are you doing?" She straightened up, wiped a smear of gun oil off her cheekbone with the back of her wrist, and left a gray streak there and didn't notice. "Your barrel's turned too far in," she said. Court blinked. "Headspace is tight," she said. "Half a click, maybe a full one. And whoever timed it last did it with the gauge, not with their hands, and the gauge lied to them because—" She reached down and tapped the receiver twice with one knuckle right at the base of the T-slot. "There's a burr in here. Right there. It's been there a long time. It's not enough to fail a gauge. It's enough to make the bolt hang for about 1/100th of a second and let go late." Nobody said anything. "That's your stutter," she said. And the whole line, 6 positions, 100 people, the water going flat and green out past the pilings, went so quiet I could hear the sawgrass ticking. Because she'd said the name. Stutter. Nobody had said that word out loud that morning. Not on the mic, not on the line, not once. It's a shop name. It's a name 3 or 4 of us use in the arms room with the door closed. And she'd said it like it was hers. Here is where I need to slow down and explain something, because if you don't know guns, this is going to sound like magic, and it wasn't magic. It was worse than magic. It was somebody knowing more than everybody. An M2's headspace is the gap between the face of the bolt and the base of the round. Too much gap, the case ruptures. Too little, the bolt can't seat and the gun beats itself to death, or worse, it fires before it's locked. Timing is when the gun fires relative to when the bolt is fully home. Too early is how people die. You set both with gauges, little steel tabs. Go, no go. You screw the barrel in, back it off 2 clicks, check with the gauge, done. It's on a laminated card in every arms room in the Navy. The gauge tells you the dimension. It does not tell you the behavior. And the thing about behavior is you can only learn it by feel, over years, on one specific gun. And even then most people don't, because most people shoot a gun and hand it back. She hadn't touched a gauge. She'd listened to the bolt slam 3 times and told us where the burr was. I know she was right because 40 minutes later I put a bore light and a dental mirror in there and found it. A ridge in the T-slot about the size of a fingernail clipping, work-hardened, polished smooth by a quarter-century of steel sliding over it. You would never see it. You'd never feel it with a finger. But if you'd fired 11,000 rounds through that gun in one summer, and if it had once tried to kill somebody you loved, you might remember exactly where it lived. Court said, "That's with respect, ma'am. That's not how you diagnose a weapon." "No," she agreed. "It's how you diagnose this weapon. There's a procedure." "There is," she nodded, and she wasn't being sarcastic, which somehow made it worse. "And the procedure has passed this gun 11 times, and it's still killed a man." Killed. The word went across the tent like a stone across a pond. Nobody had ever told me anybody died on number 4. Nobody. 6 years, 5 days a week. Chief Delaron said the gun had a memory, and that was the whole story, and I never asked what the memory was of. I looked at the second row of the bleachers. Odalie Prosper had her chin up. Her eyes were closed, and her nephew, the one who drove the Buick, had his arm around her shoulders and was staring straight down at his shoes. Court was losing, and he knew it, and he did what men do when they're losing in front of people. He got procedural. "Captain," he said, turning around, "Sir, I can't certify that weapon for live fire. I'm the range safety officer for this evolution. That's my authority." And here's the thing, he was right. That was his authority. He wasn't wrong on the paper. He was wrong on the day. Captain Lanu uncrossed his arms and walked out onto the line. Big man, 6'3" and heavy through the middle now, and he moved like weather. He came out and he stood between the two of them, and he looked at Court, and he said, quietly enough that only about 8 of us heard it, "You're right, Dane, it's your call." Court's chin came up. "And I'd like you to think real careful," the captain said, "about who you're making it in front of." Court looked at the woman, really looked maybe for the first time, at the collar, at the silver. I watched him do the arithmetic. 2 stars on a woman in a rental sedan, in old running shoes, on a range that's closing. And I watched him get the answer wrong. Because Dane Court had spent 4 years being the guy who knew about guns. And if she was right about the burr, then he'd been wrong for 4 years. And there is nothing a certain kind of man will not do to avoid having been wrong for 4 years. He said loud for the tent, "Sir, rank doesn't fix headspace." And he honestly, sincerely thought that was a good line. Some of the retired chiefs owed, the way a crowd does at a fight. 2 of them laughed. The congressional staffer had his phone out and was holding it low against his thigh like nobody could see. She let it hang there for about a second and a half. Then she said, "No, it doesn't." She reached into her hip pocket and took out a key ring. Little brass key ring, the cheap kind you buy at a hardware store. And hanging off it, next to a house key and a rental fob, were 2 flat pieces of steel, worn to a shine, each about the size of a stick of gum. A go gauge and a no-go gauge. She'd been carrying them in her pocket, on her key ring. In 2024, on a Tuesday, driving a rental car to a ceremony. She held them up between 2 fingers, so the light caught them. "Gauge it yourself," she said. Court gauged it. I want to tell you it was tense and it took forever. But the truth is it took maybe 90 seconds, and it was the most excruciating 90 seconds of my professional life. Because Dane Court's hands were shaking and everybody could see it. And he was trying so hard to look casual that he dropped the no-go gauge in the sand and had to blow it off. I stood at his shoulder because that's my job. GM1, somebody's got to spot. He backed the barrel out, seated the go gauge, ran the bolt. Then the no-go. And the bolt closed on the no-go gauge. It shouldn't. That's the whole point of a no-go gauge. If the bolt closes on it, your headspace is out, except when it closes because everything else is fine and the gauge is being deceived by something it can't measure. Court's face didn't change. He said, "Reed's long. It's out of spec the other way." She said, "Turn it in a click and try again." He did. Bolt hung, just barely, that little hitch, the half a second where a piece of steel doesn't want to go home. He tried a 3rd time. It hung again. And there it was, in front of 100 people. The stutter, doing the thing that no gauge in the United States Navy had ever been able to catch, in broad daylight, in the hands of the man who'd been signing it off for 4 years. Court knelt there with his hand on the charging handle for a long moment. Then he stood up, and he brushed the sand off his knee, and he did not look at anybody. "Barrel comes out," he said. "Somebody get me a spare." "No," she said. Everybody looked at her. "Leave it," she said. "I know how it shoots." Now let me tell you about 1999. Not because she told it. She never told any of it, not that day, not to me. I put it together over the next 6 months out of a ledger and a phone call and one conversation on a porch in Terrebonne Parish with an old woman who wanted to talk about her son. August 1999. Salt Kettle Range, night live fire. A gunner's mate 3rd class named Sabine Rask, 28 years old, is the line coach on Range Charlie. She's been at Salt Kettle 2 years and she's already a small legend, in the small way that people are legends inside a fence. She'd rung the kettle bell the year before, at 1,600 yards in daylight, and the range detachment had been so annoyed about it that they'd made her do it twice more with a spotter watching to be sure. She missed both times. Then she hit it on the 4th. They put her name on brass anyway. She asked them not to. Her best friend on that range is a bosun's mate second class from Terrebonne Parish named Wendell Prosper. Windy, 26 years old, the kind of man who is loud in a way that makes rooms better. He is engaged to a girl named Cerise. He has a mother named Odalie who mails him boudin in a cooler with dry ice, and he shares it with everybody and eats about 4% of it himself. It's a night shoot. Tracers. Number 4 is at position 4, which is where it lived back then in the middle of the line. And at 23:40, number 4 runs away. Here's what running away means. The gun keeps firing after the trigger is released because something in its sear backplate, a burr in a T-slot, has decided to. It doesn't stop. It cannot stop. It will fire until the belt is empty or somebody breaks the belt. And the whole time, 84 pounds of steel is bucking on a tripod, and the muzzle is climbing, and the tripod legs are walking in the sand. The correct procedure is, hold the gun down, keep it pointed down range, let it run dry or break the belt. The belt was long. It was a night shoot, and they'd built 200-round belts. Windy Prosper was the ammo bearer at position 4. He was on the left, kneeling, feeding. The gun ran, and the tripod walked, and it started coming left. Left was positions 3, 2, 1. Left was 14 people. Windy Prosper grabbed the belt. Not the gun, the belt. He got both hands on it about 18 inches from the feed tray, and he pulled back and down, and he broke the link. He actually broke it with his hands, a live belt running through a gun at 500 rounds a minute. And the gun fired 4 more rounds and went silent. And when they got the light on him, the last 3 feet of that belt had gone through his hands like a bandsaw. He lived 9 days. Not from the hands. The hands were bad, but the hands weren't it. What got him was the round that had cooked off in the chamber while he was fighting the belt and split the case, and a piece of brass about the size of a dime went in under his arm at an angle that no surgeon in Biloxi could do anything about. He walked to the truck. That's the part Odalie tells. He walked to the truck, and he was making a joke about the boudin, and he was dead 9 days later in a hospital bed with his mother in the chair. The board of inquiry ran 14 weeks. The gun passed every check. The finding was materiel failure, cause undetermined. Nobody was at fault. It's the worst finding there is, because it means nothing can be fixed and nobody can be blamed, and everybody carries it forever in a pocket where they can feel it. Sabine Rask was the line coach. She was the one who ordered break the belt. She was 11 feet away and she was 28, and it was her range and her gun and her friend. She rang the kettle bell one more time in 2001, alone, on a Sunday, with a range chief who had to be talked into unlocking the gate. Then she left the enlisted ranks, commissioned, went ordnance, then went to sea, then went to places I don't have the clearance to know about, and every 3 years for 23 years a promotion board looked at a woman with a rebuilt knee and a burned scar on her right hand and moved her up, and none of them, I would bet a year's pay, ever asked her about a bell. WMP. Wendell M. Prosper. Scratched into the left side plate of number 4 with a center punch by a woman who had to hold the punch in her left hand because her right one was in a burn dressing. I'd been looking at those 3 letters for 6 years. But I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew, standing on that line at 9:51 on a Tuesday in August, was that a 2-star Admiral had just told a room full of people that this gun had killed a man, and that the captain hadn't contradicted her, and that Odalie Prosper had closed her eyes, and that the plaque in the tower said GM3 SRASK twice. I had my green notebook out. I don't remember taking it out. My hands had done it. 6 years of round counts, barrel changes, every stoppage on every gun dated, initialed, and on the inside back cover in Chief Delaron's handwriting, which I'd inherited with the notebook system and never questioned. For barrel B, do not change, do not gauge cold, ask the tower. Ask the tower. I'd read that line 400 times and never once understood it as an instruction to a person. I thought it meant check the range control log. I thought it was housekeeping. I looked up at the tower window. And I understood, all at once, the way you understand a thing that's been sitting in front of you your entire adult life, that the tower was not a building. The tower was where the plaque was. As the plaque, Delarond had been telling us, in the only way a chief can tell you something he isn't allowed to say. If you ever have a question about number 4, go find S. Rask. Tolliver, I said. The kid was at position 2, holding a cleaning rod he had no reason to be holding, staring at the Admiral with his mouth about a quarter open. Tolliver. He jumped GM1. Tower, second cabinet bottom shelf behind the flare kit. There's 4 green ledgers. Bring me 1999. He stopped. GM1. He ran. 19 years old, big ears, running full tilt across a live-fire line on a shell road that eats tires, and Bex Marchetti had to step out of his way. The Admiral watched him go. Then she turned and looked at me, and her eyes were pale gray-brown, and there was still a smear of gun oil on her cheekbone. "Mester," she said. She'd read my name tape at some point and filed it. "There's nothing in the ledger." "Ma'am." They pulled the pages. She said it without heat, like weather. "Board of Inquiry took them in '99. I'd know. I signed the receipt." I stood there with a green notebook in my hand. She looked back down at the gun, put her palm flat on the receiver. It must have been 140 degrees in that sun, and she just left it there and said, half to herself, the way she'd said Bell's still out there at dawn. "Doesn't matter, I remember." Court came back with the ammunition. I don't know if he'd been sent or if he'd gone on his own. He carried a can of linked ball in each hand, which is 100 rounds each, and he set them down at position 6 harder than he needed to. 10 rounds, he said. "That's the rule. Everybody got 10. She nodded. 10 rounds, she said, on a gun with a sear that won't hold. "Ma'am, if that gun runs away with you on it." Then somebody breaks the belt. She was already lifting the top cover. "That's the drill, isn't it? That's what we tell the 19-year-olds. Court's jaw moved. And it was right there, right in that half-second, that I saw Dane Court come this close to being a decent man. I saw it cross his face. He was going to say, "Ma'am, don't." He was going to say, "Let me do it." I know he was. The words were in his mouth. And then somebody in the bleachers, some fool, some absolute nobody whose name I will never learn, called out, "Come on, Chief, let her shoot." Laughing, still laughing. 20 minutes after she'd found a burr in a T-slot by listening, still. And Court's ears went red again, and he stepped back and he said, "The line will be hot. 10 rounds, ma'am." And he walked away. She didn't take the 10 rounds off the top of the can. She knelt down sideways, one hand on the tripod leg, that rebuilt knee, and she opened the can and she pulled the whole belt out onto the mat, all 100 rounds, and she ran it through her fingers. Link by link. 100 rounds, 200 and something links. She went through every single one, thumbing each round, feeling the seat, checking that no case had backed out, that no link was sprung. 4 minutes for the gun, 6 minutes for the belt. 6 minutes of 100 people watching a woman count bullets. Somewhere around minute 3, the laughing stopped for good. You could feel it stop. It's a physical thing in a crowd, like a pressure change before rain. Because whatever people had decided she was at 9:47, by 9:57 she was very obviously somebody who had done this 10,000 times, and everybody in that tent could see it, and every one of them was doing the same arithmetic Court had done, and getting a different answer. Bex Marchetti got up off the bleachers, walked down and stood at parade rest at position 5 with his arms behind his back. Didn't say a word, just stood there. Then one of his guys did, then another. Then the old bosun, Pearl, 71 years old, came down the bleacher steps sideways with a hand on the rail, same way she had, and stood at the end of the line with his hat in his hands. Nobody told them to. When she checked the last link, she pulled 10 rounds off, laid them across her palm, looked at them. Then she stripped off another 10 and set those beside the first 10. "Ma'am," I said, quiet. "He said 10. I know what he said. She was looking out at the water, out past the pilings, 1,600 yards, where the mirage was already boiling up off the surface into a green-gray soup with a rumor in the middle of it. "He said 10 and I'll shoot 10, she said. "The other 10's for after." "After what, ma'am?" She loaded the belt into the feed tray, closed the cover, and pulled the bolt back twice. And she said, "After it runs away. There's a thing that happens to a range when it goes hot that I've never been able to explain to civilians. Nothing changes, that's the thing. The sand is the same sand, the sun's the same, nobody moves. But the air gets a weight to it, and every sound gets very specific, a boot scuffing, a can lid, somebody's breath, and you become extremely aware of exactly where every human body on that line is standing, the way you'd be aware of them if the floor was thin ice." Court said it into the microphone flat, no showmanship left in him. "The line is hot." And Salt Kettle Range, for the last time in its life, went quiet and heavy. She got down behind number 4. Not smoothly. That's the part the club versions leave out, and it's the part I want you to see. She had to go down on the right knee first, hand on the tripod leg, and then swing the left knee under her, and there was a half-second where she was just a 54-year-old woman with a bad knee lowering herself onto a rubber mat in the sand. Then she settled in behind the spade grips, and everything above her waist changed. The shoulders came down. The elbows came in. Her thumbs went to the butterfly trigger and her chin dropped and her spine went into a shape I've seen maybe a dozen times in 19 years, in men and women who have shot so much that their bodies have built a chair out of the gun. She wasn't sitting behind it. She disappeared into it. "Mester." "Ma'am." "You're spotting." "Yes, ma'am." No, she didn't look up. "The kid is." Tolliver had come back from the tower with a green ledger under each arm and his eyes about the size of hubcaps. He froze. "Ma'am," I said, "he's got 9 weeks in." "I know how many weeks he's got." Still not looking up. She was cranking the T and E, the little brass wheel that lets you dial the gun up and down in tiny increments, and she was doing it by count, clicks under her thumb, not looking at the numbers. "Kid, get on the scope." Tolliver looked at me. I nodded because what else do you do? He put the ledgers down in the sand and got behind the spotting scope at position 6 and put his eye to it, and his hands were shaking so bad the scope wobbled. "Both eyes open," she said. "Ma'am." "Both eyes. You keep one shut, you'll be blind in 20 minutes and you'll start lying to me about splashes." She reached over and without looking tapped the back of his hand. "And take your hand off the focus. You said it once, then you leave it." He took his hand off the focus. "Now tell me what the water's doing." Tolliver stared into the scope. 9 weeks in the Navy, 100 people behind him, a 2-star Admiral 18 inches to his left. He said in a voice that cracked in the middle, Ma'am, it's kinda boiling, like the far part. It doesn't look like water." And I watched her mouth move, just a little, the first thing close to a smile I'd seen on her all morning. "That's the mirage," she said. "Good, which way's it running?" "Running, ma'am." "Watch the top of it, not the water. The air above the water, right at the pilings. It'll be moving like something's pouring." Long pause, the sawgrass ticking. 200 feet behind us somebody's phone went off and got silenced fast. "Left," Tolliver said. It's pouring left, sorta up left." "Then we've got a left to right wind and it's about 6, she said. "And it's going to lie to us at 800 and tell the truth at 14. She dialed 2 clicks, her thumb on the brass wheel. Click, click. 1,600 yards, she said to nobody. 58-inch drop, give or take a lifetime. And she fired. You do not hear an M2 the way you hear other guns. You feel it in the sternum. It is a slow gun, 550 rounds a minute, which sounds fast until you've heard a rifle, and then you realize the 50 is going boom, 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 big and separate, like somebody hitting a steel door with a sledge. 3 rounds, that's all she took first. Boom, boom, boom. The gun rocked back on the tripod, and the sand around the muzzle went up in a gray flower, and every man on that line who wasn't wearing his hearing pro was suddenly wearing it. And then nothing. 2 seconds of nothing, which is how long it takes a bullet to go a mile at that angle. Talk to me, she said. Tolliver splash, splash short. Way short, ma'am, like 3 of 'em kinda in a line short and left. How short? I can't. Yes, you can. Use the pilings. The pilings are your ruler. Everything on this range is a ruler if you look at it right. Tolliver swallowed. I could hear him swallow. 2 pilings short, he said, and half a piling left. She said, good. And I want to be clear about something. 19 years. I have never in my life heard a senior officer say good like that to a 19-year-old. Not as praise, as information. Like the kid had handed her a wrench and it was the right wrench. She dialed, click, 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 3 clicks up, 1 right. 3 more rounds. Boom, boom, boom. 2 seconds. Closer, Tolliver said. Same left, 1 piling short. Wind's under it, she said, and I don't know if she was talking to him or to herself or to somebody who wasn't there anymore. It's dropping into the trough. It always does that here. Right at 1500 there's a spot where it just falls. Click. Then she went still. Real still. Not aiming still. Waiting still, which is a different animal. Her thumbs were off the trigger. She had her cheek down and her eyes open, and she was looking at 1,600 yards of hot green water, and she was waiting for something. 15 seconds, 20. Behind me, somebody in the bleachers whispered what's she doing and got shushed by 3 people at once. 25 seconds. And then a little wrinkle came across the surface of the sound. A darkening. The wind laying down flat for about 4 seconds the way it does out there in August, when the land breeze and the water breeze cancel each other for 1 breath. And she fired 2 rounds into that hole in the wind. Boom, boom. 2 seconds of nothing. And Tolliver came straight up off the scope, straight up, like somebody yanked him. Hit, he said. That's a hit, that's ma'am, that's on the piling. Not the bell. The piling. The post it hangs from. 8 rounds fired, and she put 2 into a 14-inch piece of creosote timber at 1,600 yards, over water in a mirage, on a gun with a bent rear sight and a burr in the T-slot. The tent made a sound, not a cheer, something lower than a cheer. She hadn't moved. She was already dialing. 1 click. Half a click actually, she rode it, thumb on the brass, and I saw her feel for the half. 2 rounds left of her 10. Kid, she said, don't watch the splash, watch the bell. It'll swing before you hear anything. Now, I've told this part maybe 40 times. And every time I get to here I have to stop and take a drink of something, and I'm not a drinking man anymore. She fired round 9. And she took her thumbs off the trigger. And the gun kept going. There's a word for what a runaway M2 does, and the word is nothing like what you think. It doesn't roar, it doesn't scream, it just keeps making that big flat boom 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 with absolutely no reference to whether a human being wants it to. And what's horrifying about it, what puts ice down the back of every man who's ever seen it, is that the gun looks exactly the same. It looks like a gun being fired on purpose. There is no signal. There's no alarm. It just doesn't stop when it's supposed to stop. And you understand in 1 full second that the machine has come loose from the person. And there is now a thing on this earth firing half-inch bullets, and nobody is deciding anything. The muzzle climbs. That's physics. Every round pushes the barrel up a hair, and the tripod's not bolted, and the sand's soft, and the left leg starts to walk. Left. Toward position 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Toward the tent. Toward a bleacher with a 79-year-old woman on it holding a folded piece of paper. Boom, 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 boom. Dane Court screamed, "Run away, run away." And I have thought a lot about the fact that the first man to move was him. He didn't run backward. He ran forward. Big man, 40-something, thumbs in his belt. Dane Court threw himself flat across the front left tripod leg and put his shoulder into it and pinned it into the sand with his whole body weight. And he was still screaming, "Break the belt. Break the belt," with his face 6 inches from a barrel putting out 1,500 degrees. Boom, boom, boom. And Tolliver moved. 19 years old. 9 weeks in. He came up off that spotting scope and he went for the belt, both hands, exactly the way it says to in the manual, exactly the way I taught him, exactly the way a bosun's mate second class from Terrebonne Parish did it on a night in August 1999. And an arm came across his chest like a gate. She never let go of the gun. Right hand still on the spade grip, shoulders still driving the whole 84 pounds down into the tripod, holding it, and her left arm shot out sideways and caught that kid across the sternum and threw him. Threw him, 180 pounds of 19-year-old, off his feet, backward into the sand. And she screamed at him, and it was the only time all day she raised her voice, and it did not sound like an admiral. It sounded like a 28-year-old gunner's mate on a night range. "Don't you touch it." Boom, boom, boom. Tolliver landed on his back with his mouth open. And I stood there, GM1, 19 years, 11 feet away, exactly 11 feet, and I did not move because the only thing in my head in letters 10 feet high was, "She loaded 20. 10 and 10. The other 10s for after." She hadn't been making a joke. She hadn't been being grim. She'd stood on that line and counted out exactly enough rounds that when the stutter did what the stutter does, when it finally, after 25 years, ran away in front of witnesses, it would run itself dry in under 2 seconds and there would be nothing left in it to kill anybody with. She hadn't come to shoot the bell. She'd come to let that gun run away one last time, on her, on a short belt, with nobody's hands anywhere near the links. She'd come to take it away from it. Boom, 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 boom. The muzzle climbing, cord on the leg roaring, the tripod walking maybe 4 inches left through the sand, and she had her whole body torqued against it, both hands now, driving down and right, fighting 84 pounds of loose machine with a rebuilt knee dug into a rubber mat. And she got her head down behind it. I saw it. I saw her get her cheek back down onto that receiver, in the middle of it, in the middle of a runaway with a barrel 3 inches from her face throwing heat you could feel at 11 feet, and she put her eye back on the sights. And she rode it. Boom, boom, boom. She was steering. She let it climb, and she pulled it right against its own walk, and she used the recoil. She used the thing that was killing the gun to aim the gun. And the last 4 rounds went out of number 4's barrel in a line so tight that Tolliver, flat on his back in the sand, looking straight up, seeing nothing, heard the tower spotter start screaming. Boom, 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 click, dry. And then the range went silent. I need you to understand what silent means here, because I've used the word all my life, and I've only meant it once. The gun stopped. The echo went out across the water and came back off the tree line behind us, once, and died. Court was still lying across the tripod leg with his face in the sand. Tolliver was on his back. 100 and some people in a tent were on their feet, and not one of them was making a sound. No birds. The gulls had gone up at the first burst and they were somewhere out over the sound, wheeling, not calling. And she stayed down behind it, cheek on the receiver, eye open, not moving. Waiting. because 1,600 yards is 4,800 feet, and sound comes back across water at about 1,100 feet a second. And if you have done this before, if you have done this on a Sunday in 2001 with a range chief, you had to beg for a key. Then you know exactly how long you have to wait. 4.25 seconds. I counted them, I didn't mean to. My mouth was moving. 1. Court lifted his head out of the sand. 2. Odile Prosper stood up in the second row, just stood. Her nephew grabbed for her arm and she took it away from him. 3. Captain Ovid Lanu took his cover off. 4. Bex Marchetti, 30 feet down the line at parade rest, closed his eyes. And on 4.25, out of that boiling green nothing at the far end of a range that was closing in 6 hours, out past the pilings, across a mile of flat water, a bell rang. It wasn't loud. That's what nobody gets right. Everybody who tells this story makes it a gong, some enormous bronze thunderclap. It wasn't. It came across all that water, thin and small and a little bit sour, the way a bell sounds when it's cracked and green and hasn't been struck in 23 years. Ton. And then, because the bell was swinging now, because a half-inch bullet had hit it and set it moving on its hanger. Ton, ton, ton. 4 notes getting smaller going out. 100 and some people stood in a tent on the Mississippi coast and listened to a bell they had never in their lives heard and would never hear again, ring itself quiet. Nobody cheered. I want that written down somewhere. Nobody cheered, not one person. 106 people watched the impossible get done in front of them, and every single one of us stood there with our hands at our sides like we were at a graveside. Because by then we all knew. Somehow. Nobody had explained one thing, and every soul on that range knew that we were not watching a trick shot. We were watching somebody keep an appointment. She got up slow, rolled off the gun onto her hip first, then got the right knee under her, then the tripod leg with her hand. Same as she'd gone down, 54 years old. Her hands were black to the wrist, carbon and oil, and a long red wheal across the meat of her left palm where the top cover had come back into it. She looked at the gun. Then she leaned down and put her right hand, the scarred one, the burn, the shine, flat on the left side plate, over 3 letters somebody had scratched there with a center punch a quarter century ago. And she stood there like that for maybe 5 seconds. Then she straightened up, and she turned around, and she found Tolliver, who was sitting in the sand where she'd thrown him with a look on his face like he'd been dropped out of an airplane. She walked over and put her hand out. He took it, she pulled him up. And she said, quiet to him. And I only heard it because I was 11 feet away, and the range was still the quietest place on earth. You reached for it, that's the worst thing about you. She was still holding his hand. Don't ever fix that, but don't ever do it again. Tolliver said, yes, ma'am, in a voice that wasn't there. She let go, she turned to Court. Court was on his feet now. Sand down his whole front and his beard, his shooting shirt with the company logo ripped at the shoulder seam where he'd hit the tripod. There was blood coming from his left forearm. He'd put it against the barrel shroud for about 1.5 seconds and he hadn't even noticed yet. She looked at that arm, then she looked at his face. And Dane Court, who had a microphone and a laugh and 4 years of being the guy who knew about guns, opened his mouth and got out, in a completely wrecked voice. Ma'am, You went forward, she said. He stopped. Every man out here went backward. You went forward and you got on that leg. She wiped her palm on her khakis and left a black print there. That's the only thing that matters about you today. The rest of it, I've forgotten already. Court's mouth worked, nothing came out. She said, get somebody to look at that arm. Then she walked past him, past me, past position 5 and 4 and 3, toward the tent, and she stopped at the bottom of the bleacher steps. Odile Prosper was standing at the rail. 79 years old, navy blue dress, hat with a white band. She had come down 2 rows on her own, and her nephew was 2 steps behind her with both hands half out, ready to catch her, not daring to touch her. The 2 women looked at each other over a bleacher rail for a long, long time. Nobody in that tent breathed. And then Odile Prosper lifted her hand, the one that had been closed around a folded piece of paper since 7:30 that morning, closed so long that the paper had gone soft and damp and taken the shape of her fist, and she held it out. And she said, in a voice that had Louisiana in every syllable of it, "He wrote me a letter, Cher. 9 days he was in that bed, and one day he was awake enough." She was not crying, I want to be exact, she was not crying. "They sent it to me with his things, and I have read it every August for 25 years, and I never in my life knew who he was talking about, and I asked the Navy, and the Navy told me the record was sealed." Her hand was shaking, the paper was shaking. 25 years, I've been carrying somebody's name I couldn't put a face on. She unfolded it, 2 folds, soft as cloth. And she held it out over the rail to a 2-star Admiral with black hands and gun oil on her cheekbone and said, "Read it to me, out loud so they all hear it." She didn't take the paper. That's the first thing. Odile Prosper held that letter out over the rail, and Sabine Rask looked at it, and she put her hands behind her back. I thought everybody thought that she was refusing. Then she said, "Ma'am, my hands are dirty, I'll get carbon on it." And Odile Prosper said, "It's my son's, get carbon on it." So she took it. She stood at the bottom of the bleacher steps in 94 degrees, holding a piece of paper that had been folded and unfolded 25 Augusts, and she looked down at it for a while. And then she said, before she read a word, "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you for something first." Odile Prosper waited. "There's 100 people here," she said, "and when I read this, they're going to know a thing about your son, and I'd rather they hear it from you whether they get to." The old woman put both hands on the rail. "They've been laughing all morning," she said. "Let 'em hear. I've got a photocopy of that letter now. Mrs. Prosper had one made for me 2 years later at a Walgreens in Huma, and she wrote on the back of it in blue ink, for the one with the notebook. It's in a drawer at my mother's house because I don't trust myself to keep it in a place I live. I'm not going to give you the whole thing, because it isn't mine, and because a lot of it is a young man talking to his mother about people I never met and a dog named Peanut. But this is the part she read, standing on a firing line, out loud in that gravel voice, without her voice breaking one single time, and I have never in my life seen a human being do a harder thing. "Mama, they got me on the good stuff, so if this don't make sense, that's why. Nurse says write it down while you can, so. Don't be mad at the Navy. It ain't the Navy, it was the gun. And don't be mad at Sabine. You never met her. She the one I told you about, the one who beat me at cards on the barge that time and wouldn't give my money back. She was lying coach that night. She hollered break the belt and I broke the belt. Mama, listen, she hollered it at herself. She was coming for it, I seen her coming for it. She was 2 steps out and I was on my knees already and my hands was closer. That's the whole of it. My hands was closer. If I had let her come, she would have got it, and it would be her in this bed and me writing to her mama, and her mama don't deserve that letter any more than you do. So I got it first, and I'd do it again, and don't you tell nobody different. She been sitting in that chair in the hall. They won't let her in, but she won't go. 9 days, mama, somebody feed that girl. When you meet her, and you will, because she the kind that shows up, don't you say one word to her about sorry. She don't need sorry. She needs somebody to tell her to go on and live. So that's your job. That's the last thing I'm ever gonna ask you for. Tell her to go on and live. Your boy. Wendy." She folded it back up, 2 folds. And she handed it across the rail, and Odile Prosper took it, and the old woman closed both hands around it and looked up at her. And Odely Prosper said, 25 years late, in front of 106 people. Go on and live share. I have heard grown men cry maybe 4 times in my life. Never like that. Pearl, the old bosun, 71 years old, sat down right in the sand at the end of the firing line. Just sat down where he was standing and put his hands over his face. One of Marchetti's operators, big kid, sleeve of tattoos, the one who hadn't wanted to be there, turned around and walked out of the tent and stood in the sawgrass with his back to us for about 5 minutes. The congressional staffer had his phone up, and then he put it down, and then he put it in his pocket, and I watched him do it, and I decided I'd been wrong about him. Tolliver was crying so hard, he had the heels of both hands in his eyes. And Sabine Rask stood there with black hands and did not cry, and I understood something about her that I've never been able to fully say out loud. That woman had spent 25 years not being allowed to. Because here's the arithmetic of a night range in 1999. She hollered, "Break the belt." That's an order. She was the line coach. Those are her words to give. And a bosun's mate second class heard them and did exactly what he was told, and it killed him. And she'd been running toward it herself. Everybody who was there said so. All 4 of them I eventually tracked down. She was 2 steps out. Wendy Prosper's hands were 18 inches closer to those links than hers were, and that 18 inches is the entire difference between a woman who is an admiral today and a man who is a name on a bell. For 25 years, every board, every screening, every promotion package, every one of them said the same thing: materiel failure, cause undetermined. No fault. No fault is not the same as not your fault. A board can't give you that. Nobody can give you that. Only one person on this earth could ever have given her that, and he was in a hospital bed in Biloxi with a piece of brass in him and a pen in his hand, and he wrote it out, and he gave it to his mother, and the Navy sealed the record, and the mother didn't know who to hand it to. 25 years, both of them holding half of it. The captain came down. Ovid Lanu came off the corner of that tent and walked out on the line with his cover in his hand, and he stopped in front of her, and he said loud, so it carried, and I've never respected a man more. "Admiral, I owe you an apology. I knew who you were at 0900, and I let them laugh at you." She said, "You were curious." I was. Was it worth it? Captain Lanu looked down the line, at Court with his ripped shirt and his burned arm, at Tolliver in the sand, at Pearl with his hands over his face, at Marchetti standing at parade rest like a stone, at the tarp, folded badly, at the water at the pilings. He said, "Ma'am, I'll be honest with you. I've been trying for 4 months to figure out how to close this range in a way that means something." And she said, "It closed itself, sir. I just came to say goodbye to it." Now let me back up and finish 1999, because there's a piece of it I've been holding. I told you the ledger pages were gone. She said the board took them in 99, and she signed the receipt. That's true. But here's what I found in a green ledger in the tower, on the shelf behind the flare kit. When Tolliver went and got 1999, and dropped it in the sand and forgot about it for 3 hours while the world turned over. They didn't take the back of the book. The Board of Inquiry took the pages for August 1999. Ripped clean, you can see the stub. 14 weeks of investigation, and they took the firing log, the round counts, the maintenance entries, all of it. They did not take the inside back cover. And on the inside back cover of that ledger, in pencil, in a small tight hand that ran uphill toward the right, was this: 411,400 RDS this QTR, barrel B. Bolt hangs have reported X4, within spec. It is not within spec. If they will not pull it, I will not put a boot on it. GM3S Rask, 12 AUG 99. 12 August. The accident was the 23rd. 11 days. She'd written it down. She'd reported it 4 times and been told the gauge said it was fine. And on the 12th of August, she took a pencil and wrote in the back of a ledger that she wasn't going to let a junior man behind that gun. And on the 23rd of August, at a night shoot, number 4 was at position 4, and Sabine Rask was the line coach, and Wendell Prosper was on the ammo can, not the trigger, which is exactly where she'd have put him. Not on the gun. Beside it. She kept a boot off it. She just couldn't keep hands off the belt. I found that page at about 1400 that afternoon, sitting on the tower steps with a can of warm Coke, after everybody had gone to the reception. And I want to tell you that I sat there for a while, and I couldn't have told you my own name. Because the third line, have reported X4. Reported to who? I went and got the maintenance action forms. 6 years I'd been the guy in that arms room, and I'd never had a reason to go back further than 2015. The 1999 MAFs were in a fiberboard box in a Connex that leaks, and they were furred with mildew, and I read all 4 of them standing up with the door open because the smell was so bad. 4 reports, 22 July, 2nd August, 9th August, 12th August. Every one of them signed off within specification, no action required. Every one of them signed by the same range weapons officer. And that name is not going in this story, and I'll tell you exactly why. Because he's dead, 2011, heart, in a hospital in Pensacola, and because he was 31 years old in 1999, and he did what the laminated card told him to do, and the laminated card was wrong, and every man in the United States Navy would have done the same thing. That's the horror of it. Nobody was a villain. A gauge said a number. The number was right. The gun was lying. And a woman who could hear the lie wrote it in pencil in the back of a book. And there was no procedure on God's earth for my hands say, it's going to kill somebody. She'd been carrying that too. She reported it 4 times, and the paper said no. You want to know why a 2-star Admiral drives a rental car 1,100 miles to a range that's closing? She didn't come for the bell. She came because on the 24th of August, that gun was going to get trucked 200 miles east to a facility with newer berms, and it was going to get bolted onto a line with a fresh coat of paint, and a fresh maintenance jacket, and a fresh set of 19-year-olds. And every gauge in the state of Florida was going to keep telling everybody it was fine. She came to make it run away in front of witnesses. She came to make it do it on her, on a 20-round belt, with a range safety officer and a captain and 106 people watching, so that it would go into the record, the real record, the one with names in it, as uncommanded fire, confirmed in the presence of the following. And she loaded 10 extra rounds, so it would run dry before it could get to the tent. I sat on those steps and I ran the math on it. 20 rounds, cyclic rate 550, 110 milliseconds a round. 10 rounds after the trigger release is 1.1 seconds of runaway. In 1.1 seconds, a walking tripod moves about 4 inches. She'd measured it. 25 years, and she knew to the inch how far that gun could get. But here's the part that puts a hand on the back of my neck, still 2 years on. She shot the bell with it. She didn't have to. She could have pointed it at the water and let it run. Same evidence, same witnesses, same record. Instead, she put 9 rounds downrange on the most impossible target on that coast. And when the seer let go on round 9, she got her cheek back down on a runaway machine gun and rode the last 11 rounds into a bronze bell at 1,600 yards. I've asked myself why. I think, and I'm just a gunner's mate, so take it for what it's worth, I think it was the only way she could think of to make that gun do something good on its way out. 25 years it had been a thing that killed a man. She had about 1.5 seconds of it being a runaway in front of witnesses, and she spent that 1.5 seconds making it ring a bell. I think she was giving it a death it could live with. I don't know how else to say that. The reception was at 11:30 in the tent, and it was the strangest reception I have ever attended, because nobody could talk. They tried. There was a sheet cake. There was a speech from the congressional staffer that lasted 4 sentences, and he sat down. Somebody had printed a banner. People stood around holding paper plates and looking at each other. And Dane Court came and found me. He had a bandage on his forearm. A real one, the corpsman had done it. 2nd degree over about 4 inches. And he'd lost the shooting shirt and was standing there in a stained undershirt with sand still in his beard. He said GM1. Chief. He wasn't a chief. He'd never been a chief. Everybody called him chief, and he'd never once corrected them. And I'd known that for 4 years, and I called him chief anyway because it was 100 degrees and he'd thrown himself across a tripod leg. He stood there a while. Then he said, "That gun's been on my line 4 years. Yeah. I signed it 11 times. I know, I've got the book." He nodded. He looked out at the water. The tide had turned and the pilings had grown a foot. "How'd she hear it?" he said. And it wasn't really a question. It was a man asking how you can spend 4 years being the guy who knows about guns, and then find out that knowing about guns is a thing that takes 25 years and costs you a friend. I said she wasn't hearing the burr, Chief. He looked at me. She was hearing him, I said. Dane Court put his hand over his mouth and stood there. Then he walked away, and about an hour later I saw him at position 6 with a bore light and a dental mirror, on his knees in the sand in his undershirt, looking into the T-slot of the gun that had beaten him, all by himself, with nobody watching. That's when I stopped being able to dislike him. She found me at 12:40, out at the Connex, while I was locking up the ledgers. Just walked up, hands in her pockets. She'd washed to the elbows and there was still carbon in the creases of her knuckles. "Mester, ma'am, you've got a notebook." I took it out, held it up, green, waterproof, curled at the corner. She looked at it for a second, and something went across her face that I couldn't read. "Delarond had a green one," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I've got his system. He wrote in the back of mine before he retired." "What he write?" I opened it and read it to her. "4 B, do not change, do not gauge cold, ask the tower." She stood there in the sun. Then she laughed, one breath, not a happy sound. 20 years, she said. 20 years and that old man still telling people to come find me and nobody ever did. "Ma'am, I thought it meant the range control log." "I know what you thought." She wasn't unkind about it. Everybody thought that. That's why he wrote it that way. He couldn't put it plain, the record was sealed. He'd have been talking about a board finding. So he wrote a riddle and put it in the back of a book and hoped somebody'd get curious. She looked at the tower, at the little window where a piece of brass hangs next to a fire extinguisher. "Nobody got curious," she said. And I said the truest thing I have ever said in my life, which is, "Ma'am, I read that line 400 times and I never once turned around." She was quiet. Then she said, "You turned around today." "Too late, Mester," and she said it the way she'd said good to Tolliver, as information, not comfort. "There is no early, there's the day you turn around." She put her hand out. I shook it. That scarred hand, wide flat burn from the base of the thumb, smooth and shining and hard as a shell. 25-year-old burn. And I realized holding it that I'd never asked, and I never did ask, and I still don't know how she got it, and I have decided some things are not mine. Then she said, "There's one more thing, and I need you for it." "Ma'am." She nodded at the arms connex behind me. At number 4, sitting on its tripod under a tarp again, cooled down, cleared, gone quiet, waiting for a truck at 1800 that was going to take it 200 miles east to a line of 19-year-olds. "That gun does not leave this range," she said. And I said, "No, ma'am." I didn't even ask what she meant. There is no procedure for destroying a machine gun because a woman remembers it. I want that understood before I tell you the rest. Sabine Rask did not go outside the lines. She could have. She was a two-star. She could have said scrap it and somebody would have scrapped it and written the paperwork afterward, and every man on that range would have looked the other way, including me, especially me. She didn't do that. What she did was worse for her and better for everybody else, and it took 4 hours, and it was the least cinematic thing I have ever watched. She did paperwork. At 13:05 she borrowed the range office. Cinder block, one window unit that rattled, a desk with a laminate top peeling at the corner. She sat down at it in a khaki shirt with a black handprint on the thigh and she said, "Mester, Court, Marchetti, Tolliver, Captain, if you'll sit in. 5 of us in a room built for 2. She said, "Nobody's in trouble, that's the first thing. Court, look at me." Court looked at her. "There is not going to be an investigation of you," she said. "There is going to be a casualty report on a weapons system, and you're a witness on it, and so am I. Do you understand the difference?" Court's jaw was set so hard the muscle was jumping. He said, "Ma'am, I signed it 11 times. So did 9 men before you." She pulled a legal pad toward her. "And a laminated card told all 10 of you the gun was fine, and the card is Navy-wide, and there are 2,000 of these guns in the fleet. Do you see what I'm doing?" Silence. "I'm not closing a gun," she said. "I'm opening a question." And I watched Dane Court, who 20 minutes into that morning had said rank doesn't fix headspace into a microphone, sit down in a plastic chair and pick up a pen. Here is what a real thing looks like when it happens. It looks like forms. Statement of witness to uncommanded fire. 5 of them. She made each of us write it separately in different rooms, no talking, before we compared anything. Tolliver at the desk, Court on the tower steps, Marchetti in the bed of a truck, me in the arms connex with the door open for light, the captain standing in the sawgrass with a clipboard on his forearm. She would not let any of us read hers. She wrote hers on the hood of the rental car in the sun. 4 pages, both sides, and she never stopped once. Then, weapon deficiency report. Serial number, cross-reference to a maintenance jacket that went back to 1988. She sent Tolliver to dig the fiberboard box out of the leaking connex, and the kid came back with mildew on his uniform and 4 maintenance action forms from 1999 that I had found 2 hours earlier, and I saw her hand stop when he put them on the desk. 22 July, 2nd August, 9th August, 12th August. Her own handwriting on all 4, 28 years old. Her signature back then had loops in it. She read them and set them down, and squared the corners with 2 fingers. Then she picked up the pen and wrote a 5th one, dated that day, 25 years later. And she used the exact same words she'd used on the 12th of August 1999. It is not within spec. I was standing right there. I watched her write it. She wrote it in the same tight hand that ran uphill toward the right, the same as the pencil in the back of the ledger, and I understood that some part of a person just doesn't move. Then, under it, she wrote the thing that made the whole day into something more than a story people tell at a club. Root cause, work-hardened deformation, bolt T-slot left rail. Undetectable by field gauge. Recommend fleet-wide inspection. All M2 receivers manufactured prior to 1955. Bore scope, not gauge. Court read it over her shoulder and said quietly, "Ma'am, that's how many weapons is that?" She capped the pen. "About 1,100, she said. The scrapping order came out of Millington at 1648. I don't know who she called. I know she made 2 phone calls from the range office with the door shut, and the second one lasted 11 minutes, and when she opened the door she looked more tired than she had after the gun. Number 4 was condemned, struck, not shipped east, not repaired. Demilitarization by torch, receiver 3 cuts. That's the standard. You cut the receiver in 3 places so it can never be rebuilt, And then it isn't a weapon anymore, it's steel. And the steel goes in a bin. The order said the demo had to be witnessed and signed by the range weapons officer. There wasn't one. The billet had been gapped for 8 months because the range was closing. Captain Lanu looked around that room, and then he looked at me. "GM1 Mester," he said, "you are acting range weapons officer as of right now. Congratulations, it's a 4-hour tour. We did it at 1810, out past the berm, in the light that comes at the end of an August day on that coast, gold going orange going the color of old brass, with the sawgrass throwing shadows 50 feet long. Court ran the torch. Nobody assigned him, he just picked it up. I stood there with a clipboard and a form, and I called the cuts. Cut 1, forward right side plate through the barrel extension raceway. The torch went in. Steel doesn't die dramatically. It goes orange, then white, then it opens like something soft and it drips and it smells like a horseshoe. Cut 2, center both side plates through the trunnion block. Court's hands were absolutely steady. He'd been a mess for 6 hours, and the second that torch came on, the man went still. He cut through the middle of the receiver, and number 4 came apart into 2 pieces on the sand. And then he stopped. Because cut 3 in the standard is aft, through the backplate bracket. And aft on the left side plate, an inch under where the feed tray had been, were 3 letters scratched with a center punch in 1999. WMP. Court lifted the torch away and pushed his shield up and looked at her. Everybody looked at her. She was standing with her hands behind her back about 10 feet off, and she'd been standing that way for 20 minutes without saying anything. She said, "Cut it." Court said, "Ma'am." "Cut it," she said. "It's not a headstone, it's a machine gun." He put the shield down. And then he did something that I have never told anybody until now. He made cut 3 about 1.5 inches aft of where the standard puts it. He cut it legal, through the backplate bracket exactly where it says, all the way, no shortcut, no cheat, and the receiver was destroyed and the form was true and I signed it and it is on file to this day. He just made his cut in such a way that the piece of side plate with 3 letters on it came off in 1 square of steel about the size of a playing card. And when it was cool enough, he picked it up with pliers and he walked over and he held it out to her without 1 word. She looked at it a long time. Then she said, "That's not mine either." And she took it, and she turned around, and she walked to the tent where a 79-year-old woman in a navy blue dress was sitting on the end of the bleachers with a folded letter in her lap, waiting, because Odile Prosper had refused to be driven home until it was finished. She knelt down, right knee, hand on the bleacher, and she put a hot square of steel with her son's initials on it into that old woman's hands. I was too far away to hear what was said. Mrs. Prosper told me, 2 years later on her porch, with a plate of boudin between us, that I was not permitted to refuse. She said the Admiral told her, "He signed it, ma'am. He's the only one who ever signed it true." They took the 2 other pieces of number 4 away in a bin. And that would be the end, except for the bell and the plaque and 1 more thing. At 1930, the light was gone and the range was closed. Not closed for the day. Closed. Somebody had already chained the ammo connex and taken the flags down, and the bleachers were coming apart under a work light, and the whole thing was turning back into a piece of sand with some pilings in front of it. She was going to drive to Gulfport and fly out at 600. That rental car was still parked crooked across 2 spaces. And Captain Lanu stopped her at the door of the tower and said, "Admiral, 1 minute. I want you to see something." We went up. Him, her, me, and Tolliver, who had not left her side in 9 hours and who nobody had the heart to send away. The tower is small and hot and smells like coffee that was made during a different administration. And on the wall next to the fire extinguisher is a piece of brass on a piece of scarred oak. Captain Lanu had a screwdriver. He'd had the plaque off the wall at some point that afternoon, and had a man in the shop add a line, and I'll bet you a paycheck he'd sketched it on a napkin at the reception while everybody else was holding cake. He turned it around. Kettlebell confirmed. 1998, GM3S RASK. 2001, GM3S RASK. 2024, RADMS RASK. And she looked at it, and she looked at the captain, and she said, "No, sir." The captain said, "Ma'am, it's my range for 6 more hours." "Then use them properly." She took the plaque out of his hands, not rudely, she just took it. "Sir, that gun ran away today. There's a witness statement from 5 people that says the trigger was released on round 9, so who fired rounds 10 through 20? Nobody said anything. "Nobody fired them," she said. "I didn't ring that bell, I was holding on." And Ovid Lanu, I want you to know that this man understood immediately, completely, because he was that kind of officer. Ovid Lanu stood in a hot tower and said, "Then whose is it?" She held the plaque against her chest and looked out the tower window, 1,600 yards, where there was nothing to see anymore, just black water with a little moon on it. She said it was his last order. She said he never got to give one. Plaque in the range office at Salt Kettle, which is not a range anymore, it's a storage lot. They lease it to a company that keeps shrimp boats there, hangs in a hallway near the men's room. Nobody looks at it. It says, Kettlebell confirmed. 1998, GM3S RASK. 2001, GM3S RASK. 2024, BM2WM Prosper. Uncommanded fire confirmed. Now, the rest of it fast, because it's just what happened after. The fleet-wide inspection order went out that November. Borescope, not gauge, all M2 receivers of a certain vintage, 1,140 weapons. They found the deformation in 61 of them. 61 guns in the hands of people that would have hesitated. Nobody put that in a press release. There was a NAVADMIN and a change to a technical manual and a new line on a laminated card. And if you're in the Navy today and you've ever borescoped an M2 receiver and wondered why, this is why. A woman heard a bolt slam 3 times and told us where to look. Dane Court left contracting 9 months later and took a job teaching at a small state school's law enforcement program in Hattiesburg. He teaches firearms. I've heard from 2 people that on the first day of every semester he tells his students that he was wrong about a gun for 4 years, and how, and what it cost a man in 1999. He doesn't tell them she was an admiral, that's what I hear. He tells them she was right. Bex Marchetti made Master Chief. He was at the retirement. Pearl died in 2025 at 73 in his sleep in Ocean Springs. His daughter wrote to tell me. In the letter she said he told that story so many times at the end that she could recite it, and that the part he always got stuck on was nobody cheered. He'd say it twice. Nobody cheered. Not one of us. And then he'd stop and have to start again. Odalie Prosper is 81. She has a square of steel the size of a playing card in a shadow box on a wall in Terrebonne Parish, next to a photograph of a young man with big shoulders and a laugh you can see in a still picture. She keeps a letter in a Bible. She does not read it every August anymore. She told me she doesn't need to. She says she knows how it ends now. Tolliver is a GM2. He's stationed in San Diego. He carries a green waterproof notebook in his left breast pocket, and he writes down round counts, and the guys make fun of him, and he doesn't care. I mailed it to him. Delaron's system. Mine had 4 pages left in it, and I put a new one in the mail with a note in the back. I didn't write a riddle. I wrote, if a gun feels wrong, say so out loud, 4 times if you have to, and then a 5th. Somebody wrote it in pencil once, and 11 days later a good man died. GM1A Mester. Let him understand it the first time. I'm done with riddles. And Sabine Rask. She retired 18 months later, quietly, the way she did everything. 3 stars by then. There was a ceremony in Norfolk, and I wasn't there, and I'm told about 400 people were, and I'm told she spoke for 6 minutes. I've never seen her again. We've exchanged 2 letters. The second one had 4 sentences in it, and one of them was a question about a barrel change interval, which I answered. But there's one more thing from that night in the tower, and then I'll stop. When she took the plaque out of the captain's hands and said it belonged to Windy, and we all stood there in that heat, Tolliver, 19 years old, still red around the eyes, spoke up. 9 weeks in the Navy, talking to a 2-star. He said, "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She said, "Ask." He said, "How'd you know it was going to run away today?" And she was quiet for a long time, long enough that the captain started to say something and thought better of it. Then she said, "Son, I didn't know it was. I knew it could." She set the plaque down on the desk. 25 years I've been the only person alive who believed that gun was going to do it again, she said. And every gauge in the United States Navy said I was wrong, and I could not prove it. Not with paper, not with rank, not with a star on my collar, and not with 2. She looked at him. "So I came down here and I got behind it," she said, "and I gave it exactly enough rounds to be honest with, and I asked it a question." Tolliver said, barely audible, "And if it hadn't run away?" "Then I'd have been a woman who missed a bell," she said, "and gone home and been wrong for the rest of my life, and been so grateful I couldn't stand up." That's the story. I've told it wrong before. I've told it as a story about a woman who outshot a room full of men who laughed at her, because that's the version people want, and it's true, and it's the smallest true thing in it. What actually happened on that range is that 106 people learned in about 90 seconds that we had spent our whole careers trusting a number over a person. The gauge said the gun was fine. She said it wasn't. We believed the gauge for 25 years because the gauge was a procedure, and she was just a woman with a memory and a burn scar, and procedures don't get promoted past you, and memories can't be filed. And a bosun's mate from Terrebonne Parish knelt down in the sand and put his hands on a live belt because the person 11 feet away from him with the closer hands was somebody he had decided, in the last second of his life, was worth more than his own. They laughed when she picked up that 50. She didn't silence the range. She let something that had been screaming in her for 25 years finally get heard by somebody besides herself. And the sound it made, when it came across a mile of water and lasted 4 notes. Ton, 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 ton. And then it was quiet. And she stood up, and she wiped her hands on her khakis, and she went and did the paperwork. I keep thinking about her hand on that receiver at the end. Palm flat. 5 seconds. 140 degrees of sun-baked steel, and she didn't flinch, because that hand had already been burned once, a long time ago, doing something she has never told anybody about and I have never asked. Some people carry a thing until it kills them. She carried hers until she found somewhere to set it down.